Jake Lawson stood at the edge of the HOA's pristine cul-de-sac, clutching a century-old land deed with one hand and holding their future hostage with the other. Behind him, county barricades sealed off the only road to their office, a road that, unbeknownst to them, didn't belong to the HOA at all. Phones buzzed, voices shouted, and in that stunned silence, all Karen Redding could do was stammer, "You can't do this." But Jake had already done it. What happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Jake Lawson didn't rattle easy. He'd welded steel on oil rigs in Texas heat, patched roofs mid-thunderstorm, and once hauled a busted generator 5 miles by hand through the Mojave during a training op. But this was different. This was insult in paperwork form. He stood by his mailbox, calloused fingers smoothing out the latest HOA citation. The edges were already curled from where he'd crumpled and uncrumpled it 3 times. Fine 47, unapproved exterior paint color. The barn, he noted with a bitter smile, hadn't been painted in 7 years. Just good, weathered wood, honest wood. The wind rolled over the pasture, tall stalks rustling like whispers. To Jake, that sound had always meant peace, a heartbeat of land that had belonged to his family for generations. But now, every rustle felt like a threat, like they were breathing down his neck. He tossed the envelope onto the workbench inside his shed and looked around. Everything here bore his mark. The fence posts, carved with initials from when his son was little. The goat pen, cobbled from scrap but strong. The tractor, half disassembled, mid-restoration. This place wasn't just home. It was testament. When the first fine arrived, he'd laughed. By the 10th, he'd started keeping them in a shoebox. By the 30th, he'd stopped sleeping. The HOA forms came with legalese and smug tone, a war dressed in corporate jargon, and he hadn't even joined the HOA. The development had crept close over the years, its prefab homes marching like plastic soldiers across what used to be wild land. He figured they'd stop at the county line. He was wrong. That's what brought him to the sleek, glass-paneled office with its manicured hedges and overwatered potted plants. A place that looked like it had never seen dirt under its fingernails. Jake walked in boots that had patched irrigation lines at dawn and chased coyotes off the henhouse after midnight. Karen Redding stood like a courthouse statue, unmoved, immovable, and utterly convinced of her own righteousness. Her smile didn't reach her eyes when she said, "We all have to do our part, Mr. Lawson." Jake held her gaze. "My part's on my land, has been for 18 years. That land is now under community oversight," she replied, brushing imaginary lint from her blazer. Jake didn't answer. He didn't need to. The fire had already started behind his eyes. Because some wars are fought with bullets, others with bylaws, and Jake Lawson had just declared his own. Jake Lawson had never liked the taste of revenge. Too bitter, too noisy. But justice? Justice had a quiet flavor, like black coffee at dawn, earned, not sweetened. The day after his confrontation with Karen Redding, Jake didn't pace. He didn't rage. He sat. At his kitchen table, beneath a fly-specked lamp, and beside a chipped ceramic ashtray that had once belonged to his father, he began to dig, not with a shovel, but with memory. He opened the cedar trunk that smelled of dust and tobacco. Inside were yellowed papers, bound with faded ribbon. His grandfather's handwriting danced across land deeds and survey maps in a tight, stubborn script, and there it was. Parcel 13B, a sliver of land stretching up from the county road, skirting the creek and cutting through the back of what was now the HOA's headquarters. The cul-de-sac they called Heritage Way, that wasn't public domain. It was private easement. transferred by the county in 1947 to Jacob Harlan Lawson, Jake's grandfather. The deal had been clean, recorded, and unbroken. The right to grant access and revoke it belonged not to the HOA, but to the Lawson family. Jake exhaled through his nose slowly. The sound wasn't relief, it was reawakening. By 9 a.m., he was on the phone with Ellie Garrett, a sharp-eyed attorney who once helped him fight off a shady mineral rights claim. Then he rang the county clerk, who confirmed the records were valid, binding, and, most importantly, still active. At 11:42 a.m., the courier handed a manila envelope to the receptionist at the HOA office. Inside, one notarized cease and desist, one certified easement revocation, and one map annotated in red. By 12:05, Karen Redding's name flashed on his caller ID. He let it ring once, twice, then answered. Her voice was a wasp's nest. "You can't just shut down a road." Jacob stared out his window at the pasture. "Didn't shut it down," he said evenly. "Just took back what's mine." "You have no right—" He cut her off. "Check the deed." And then he hung up. No parting shot, no raised voice, just silence, the kind that lingers longer than fury. Jake stepped onto his porch with a cup of coffee in one hand and the wind rustling the grass in the other. For the first time in weeks, the land felt like it belonged to him again. Not because he'd won, but because he'd remembered who he was. By Monday morning, the cul-de-sac once paraded as Heritage Way looked like the aftermath of a quiet coup. Orange barricades, staked with official county seals, stood at both ends of the road like exclamation marks on a declaration nobody in the HOA wanted to read. Mailboxes stood untouched, gathering dust and outrage. HOA board members, used to rolling up in Lexuses and Escalades, now had to park in a neighboring church lot and walk the half-mile in heels and dress shoes, dodging sprinkler heads and dry patches of pasture. Someone in the office tried to file an emergency complaint with zoning enforcement, to claim they were being harassed by the barricades, but it backfired, because when Karen rerouted staff and visitors through a field, Jake's neighbor's leased agricultural land, the zoning office fined her personally for unauthorized use of private property. Irony thick and deserved. Inside his home, Jake said nothing, just watched the ripples spread. Ellie, his attorney, drafted a formal cease and desist to suspend all further HOA fines until a full jurisdictional review could be completed. The language was surgical. Any continued attempts to levy fines may constitute administrative harassment under Municipal Statute 43-9B. Karen didn't respond in writing. She showed up in person. A white SUV idled outside Jake's gate. Its windows rolled halfway down to avoid the glare. Karen stepped out wearing pearl earrings, wedge heels, and the exact same fake confidence she wore to city council meetings. She held a manila folder like it might tip the scale of justice. "You dropped the claim," she said with a tight smile, "and we dropped the fines. Clean slate, no harm, no foul." Jake didn't blink. He didn't even reach for the folder. "This isn't about fines," he said, voice low and steady. "It's about the fact that you thought I wouldn't fight back, that you thought no one ever would." Karen's smile faltered. "I'm not here for deals," Jake continued. "I'm here for respect." Then he turned, left her there, alone with her folder and her shrinking authority. The sound of his boots on gravel was slow, deliberate, like distant thunder coming closer. That same week, Channel 8 News aired his story. By Friday, it was national. Veteran shuts down HOA after 47 fines because he owns the road. Social media lit up like dry brush in wind. TikTokers made reenactments. Retired service members called him a hero. A Facebook group popped up. Stand with Jake. Law firms offered pro bono support. The county board opened an emergency audit of all HOA activity in the region. Jake didn't ask for war. But now that it had come to his door, he was ready, and he was winning. Jake never needed applause. Victory didn't look like speeches or headlines to him. It looked like calloused hands gripping a post-hole digger in a quiet morning without interference. So, when Karen was finally ousted, stripped of her title and exiled from the very cul-de-sac she once claimed like a throne, Jake didn't gloat. He got to work. He declined interviews, politely ignored offers to collaborate on neighborhood improvement initiatives. When the new HOA board sent a delegation with coffee and apologies, he didn't even invite them past the gate. He wasn't angry. He was finished. Instead of feeding the politics, Jake fed the soil. He hired 2 veterans fresh out of the service, one with a busted knee, the other still jumpy from years overseas, and gave them real work. Together, they cleared the overgrown eastern edge of the property, tilled it row by row, and planted the first seeds of what would become Willow Creek Garden. Raised beds, irrigation lines, compost bins from repurposed barnwood. He didn't put up a fence, and instead he put up a sign. Private road, built on honor. And below that, smaller but just as bold, veterans welcome, no permits needed. He paved the easement himself, not with asphalt, but with gravel compacted so clean and flat it hummed under the weight of tires. Solar lights, bought with his own savings, lined the edge like runway beacons. At night, they blinked softly beneath the stars, a constellation on Earth built by quiet defiance. Neighbors started showing up, not out of protest but curiosity. A widow who'd lived 3 streets over asked if she could help weed the basil. A teenager showed up with a broken bike and left with a wheelbarrow full of tomatoes. No clipboard, no rules, just hands in the dirt and stories passed over sun-warmed vegetables. The HOA, shrunken and relocated to a rented strip mall office near the freeway, sent out one final letter offering to collaborate on mutual outreach. Jake tossed it in the fireplace without opening it. As for Karen, she vanished. Some say she moved to a condo in a city with tighter noise ordinances. Others whispered she joined a knitting circle and kept her head down. Jake didn't care. Because on weekends, when the work was done and the sun dipped low, he'd sit on the bench he built near the sign, watch the light catch on the gravel, hear laughter from the garden. He didn't just reclaim his land. He redefined what community meant. And people didn't just drive by anymore. They stopped, stepped out, and stayed a while.